Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we've got a really special deck for you. It's the new Warhammer 40k Commander, Ghyrson Starn, Kelermorph. Now this is a super cool commander, let me tell you. It has so many different ways to build around it. You could build with unblockable 1/1s that are all going to turn into unblockable 3/1s basically when this is on the board. You can build a little bit of a kind of like hate themed deck or a little bit of a pinger themed deck. You can do all sorts of other things. You can have a Cavalcade of Calamity deck with tokens and Goblin Bombardment and stuff like that, and have a bunch of different ways to deal damage to the opponent. The way we are going for is a pinger deck with a little bit of a hate element thrown in to stop our opponents from doing stuff. So that's the plan, and without further ado, let's get going. This is one of my favorite commanders in a long time. And we're kicking things right off with a really strong one, Chandra's Incinerator. So this is going to cost us less to cast whenever we deal non-combat damage during a turn. That's going to be really good with Ghyrson Starn because we have a bunch of pingers and Gerson himself counts as non-combat damage. And then after this is in play, every time we deal non-combat damage, this is also going to deal that much damage to a creature or planeswalker. So it kind of gives us a situation where we're pinging the opponents and then our Ghyrson is triggering. And because Ghyrson is a triggered ability and not a replacement effect, it also means that Chandra's Incinerator is then going to trigger twice. Once for Ghyrson and once for the pinging effect. So it's just going to kind of multiply the damage exponentially. This is an amazing card in this deck and should be pretty much in every Gerson list. Next up is Cinder Pyromancer. Now Cinder Pyromancer is a nice one in the deck, so it's one of our pingers. It's going to deal 1 damage to target player. It can't hit creatures, but that's fine. And then whenever we cast a red spell, we can untap it. We have a lot of red spells in the deck, so this is going to untap a lot and deal 3 damage every time it taps. That's a lot of damage with Ghyrson out. Next up is Cunning Sparkmage. It's another one of our pingers. We have a lot of things that synergize with pingers as well. Not much to say here, just going to ping a creature or player. Defiler of Instinct is really good. We have a lot of red permanents, not only creatures. A lot of our enchantments are red enchantments too. So this is going to help us ramp a lot of these cards out because they're going to cost 1 less if we pay 2 life. And then we're also going to be able to deal 1 damage to any target whenever we play a red spell. Of course, that means it's dealing 3 damage in this deck, effectively. So really good synergy card in this deck. Firebrand Archer is there to deal a little bit more burn damage. So every time we cast a non-creature spell, it's going to deal 1 damage to each opponent. We should be able to trigger this every turn. And then, of course, with Ghyrson out, that's 3 damage to each opponent. So every time we cast a non-creature spell, we're going to be dealing 9 damage. That's awesome. And we have 35 non-creature spells in this deck, so it shouldn't be too hard to trigger this. Next up is Gibbering Fiend. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, so that's 9 damage right off the bat. And then we have Delirium, which should be easy to achieve in this deck, and you'll see we have some ways to get lands into the graveyard. Once we have Delirium, it's going to deal 3 damage to each opponent during that player's upkeep, so that's really sweet as well, just more burn. Goblin Chain Whirler is really good with Ghyrson in play. It's going to deal 1 damage to each opponent, so that's 9 damage right off the bat, and then 1 damage to each creature or planeswalker they control. So that's a board wipe. That's 3 damage to each creature or opponent's control, and 3 damage to each opponent with Ghyrson in play. That is so sweet in this deck. Goblin Sharpshooter is one of our pingers. We have a couple of ways to give it Death Touch, but even without Death Touch with Ghyrson out, it's pretty likely that you're going to be killing most small stuff in play, so this is pretty close to a one-sided board wipe in this deck, amazingly. Immolation Shaman is our first piece of hate, so whenever an opponent activates an ability, it's going to deal 1 damage to that player as long as it's not a mana ability. So that's nice to have because that's basically 3 damage with Ghyrson out. It just makes it harder for our opponents to do stuff. Izzet Static Caster is another pinger, but this one can clear the board of tokens, so really nice. Kessig Flamebreaker is another Firebrand Archer effect. It's basically going to trigger anytime we play a non-creature spell. Niv-Mizzet Draco Genius is going to work super nicely with Ghyrson. It's going to deal 3 damage to a creature or player, and as soon as it deals damage to a player, we may draw a card, so we can just keep like getting more and more cards with this out. That's really nice. Niv-Mizzet Parun is a similar kind of thing, so instead we're going to be dealing damage when we draw cards, but this also means that our opponents can't really play that many instant or sorcery spells because we are going to draw a card. It also lets us draw cards off our instants and sorceries, so that's pretty nice. Niv-Mizzet the Firebrand is very similar to Niv-Mizzet Parun, so whenever we draw a card, it deals 1 damage, which becomes 3 damage to any target, and then it can tap to draw a card. So of course, all of these cards are really strong on their own, but all together in the deck, they combo really well. We also have a couple of ways to just finish off our opponents with Ophidian Eye and Curiosity. We're not looking to do that, but you know, if the infinite combo comes up, then it comes up. Next up is Obsidian Fireheart, a pet card of mine, which becomes amazing in this deck when you have mana to sink into it. Suddenly, each land that you put a counter on is dealing 3 to their opponents every upkeep. That's going to end the game really quickly for you. Prodigal Pyromancer is another pinger effect, great with Death Touch, but still it's dealing 3 just with Ghyrson out. Same with Prodigal Sorcerer and Razorfin Hunter and Rootwater Hunter. These are all pinger effects with not much else. Spear Spewer is a nice one because it can just deal 1 damage to each player, which becomes 9 damage just for tapping it. Of course, it becomes even better if you put Curiosity or Ophidian Eye on it. Suddenly, you're going to be drawing a ton of cards. So that's also awesome if you don't have Ghyrson out. Spiteful Prankster is going to have first strike during your turn, and then whenever another creature dies, it's going to deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. So if you have ways to kill stuff on the board, and in this deck, you will, this is going to get out of hand really quickly. This can be a great finisher. If your opponent has a bunch of small things and you suddenly play a Staticaster with haste and deal with a bunch of them thanks to Ghyrson triggers, then this is going to trigger a bunch of times and deal 3 damage every time. You can just close out games super fast with this. Stuffy Doll is a bit of a memey one. It could probably be replaced, but I just think it's cute. So whenever it's dealt damage, it's going to deal that much damage to a chosen opponent, and then you can tap it to deal 1 damage to itself, which is then going to become 2 extra damage to itself because of Ghyrson, and then that's going to hit the opponent. So it's just kind of amplifying damage. It can also kind of brick wall your opponents and make them not want to attack into you, which is something we definitely need in this deck, so it's nice to have, I feel. Trinket Mage is there to search up for Basilisk Collar, basically. It can also search up for Shadow Spear or a couple of other things. Soul Ring if we're really desperate. All of these are good, but obviously Basilisk Collar is the best card in the deck. Vythian Stinger is a nice pinger that we can then reuse later in the game if it does get killed for one final last hurrah. Volshok Sorcerer is a pinger with haste. We like having haste on our pingers because it's going to let us deal the damage immediately and surprise our opponents. Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs is a spicy one. Normally it's not a very good card, but we do need some defense in this deck. It provides us with that, and it's also going to ping a player for 3 because we have a bunch of deserts in this deck. It's very likely that it's going to be online. And last but not least for the creatures is Zerzoth the Chaos Rider. So we have a bit of a devil sub-theme in this deck because devils are super good. They are 1 power creatures that deal 1 damage when they die. Those are both affected by Gerson. This is going to get us devils whenever we attack with our devils, so that's pretty good. It's also going to add a bit of randomness and fun to the game. Some people don't like that. I might end up taking it out, and my playgroup hates it. Moving on to the artifacts, we have some mana rocks. There's not much that we're going to say about these. Here they are, the usual mana rocks. You need ramp. Next up is Basilisk Collar. This is amazing with Gerson. We're going to have trouble staying alive sometimes, so we need lifelink. And if we put lifelink on Gerson, we're going to be gaining life from every trigger that we get. And in this deck, that's a lot of triggers. It's just so much life gain. One of the best cards in the deck. Caltrops is there to discourage attacks a little bit. It does discourage attacks for all players to anybody, so it's probably going to draw a little bit of hate, but it's too good to pass up on, I think. If any creature attacks, you're going to be dealing 2 extra damage to that creature, so it's 3 damage to each creature that attacks. That's going to discourage most attacks, and it should keep you safe until you can get your game plan going. Gorgon's Flail is going to give Death Touch to a creature. We obviously want it with all of our pingers. It's also great with Ghyrson. Not much to say here. Gorgon's Head also gives Death Touch. The important thing to say is that Death Touch, if you put it on Ghyrson, is basically going to mean that any of your pingers that can hit creatures also have Death Touch because Ghyrson's going to deal the extra 2 damage. Hammer of Nazan is there to protect our Ghyrson. It also means that our equipment that we play later on can equip automatically. That is very nice to have. Shadow Spear is just great, another way to give lifelink for Ghyrson, and it can also stop our opponents from having some kind of hexproof and indestructible shenanigans we can really mess with this deck. Skull Clamp is going to work really well with all our devil tokens, and we have a lot of small creatures that we can trade in for cards should we need to. And moving on to the enchantments, which is where most of the spicy cards in the deck are. We have Aether Sting, which is whenever an opponent plays a creature spell, it's going to deal 1 damage to them. This is going to deal a lot of damage over the game. If you have Ghyrson out, it's going to discourage creature decks. So if you're playing in a very creature heavy meta, this can be super good. If not, swap it out. Burning Earth is going to damage our opponents more than us, and if we have lifelink on Ghyrson, we don't even care because we're just gaining all that life back. Basically, whenever they tap a non-basic, they are going to take 1 damage, which becomes 3 damage. In a meta where there aren't a lot of non-basics lying around, again, you should cut this out. Circle of Flame is going to discourage attacks to you, which is better in a way than Caltrops, because then they're going to attack another player possibly. It's going to deal 3 damage to any creature that doesn't have flying that attacks you. Curiosity is great with Ghyrson. You're just drawing so many cards with this. You can have some absolutely ridiculous turns where you just play this on Gerson with a setup board and then you just absolutely draw a million cards off of it. It also is amazing if you have it with Gerson and you have Mana Bobs out or Burning Earth, because they can't really tap their lands to answer this, because then they're just gonna take damage and then you're just gonna draw a ton of cards. Amazing card. It's also worth mentioning that you have Burning Earth out or Mana Bobs out. You can tap your own lands to deal damage to yourself and draw cards off of this. Woof, that's pretty good. So Mana Bobs is there just like Burning Earth to deal damage whenever a player taps a land. It affects us as well, but we should have ways to get lifelink on Ghyrson and we should be fine. Ophidian Eye is another curiosity effect. Basically this one is flash. It's a little bit more expensive, but still pretty solid. Rolling Vortex is going to deal 1 damage to each player during the upkeep. That translates into 3 damage. It's going to hit you as well, but you know, sometimes you got to take a bit of damage. That being said, opponents cannot cast spells without paying mana, or they're going to take 5 damage, so that's a nice ability to have. And you can also prevent people from gaining life, because life gain is something that really hurts this deck. And Sigil of Sleep is another great combo with Ghyrson. Whenever Ghyrson deals damage to a player, return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. So this is going to mean that we're going to be able to bounce a lot of our opponent's creatures with this card. The bigger things that we can't kill. Seems nice to have. For sorceries, we have Burn Down the House. It's a great bit of removal. It's a nice board wipe. That can also double up as 3 devils, which, as we mentioned, are very good in this deck. Devil's Playground makes 4 devils, so again, fantastic. And the Festivities is great in this deck. It's 1 mana to deal 3 damage to all of our opponents and all of their creatures. And Smash the Dust gives us some options. It's a nice bit of artifact removal, or it can also deal 3 damage to each creature our opponents control. Next up we have Instants. An offer you can't refuse is there for a little bit of protection, as is Counterspell and Swan Song. The downside for Swan Song in this deck isn't even that bad, because it gives us another creature to potentially ping. We also have Chaos Warp to deal with any kind of problem permanents that our opponent might put out. And then we have Dance with Devils, which is going to let us make 2 devils at instant speed. That's also really nice to ambush people and deal a ton of damage out of nowhere. And finally, Wild Magic Surge, which is another Chaos Warp variant, which kind of covers our bases. And then we have our Planeswalkers. We have Chandra, Awakened Inferno. This is really expensive. You can put something else in the deck. There's a million options for this deck that work really well with it. But this is really nice because you instantly give each opponent an emblem that they can't get rid of that's going to deal 3 damage to them every turn and put them on a pretty fast clock. And then it also comes with a board wipe on the minus, which is pretty nice as well. Chandra Pyromaster is really good. It's 3 damage to an opponent and 3 damage to one of their creatures as the +1. That's amazing. It also comes with card advantage on the 0 ability, so it kind of hits everything we want in a Planeswalker. Tibode is going to do 2 things. It's going to stop our opponents from gaining life, and it's going to make more Devil tokens. We're all up for both of those things, so really awesome in this deck. And Zariel, Archduke of Avernus, does a lot of things we want again. It gives our creatures haste, which is great because we have a lot of pingers, and the 0 ability also makes us Devils, which, as we've mentioned, are fantastic. So a lot of synergy there. And then for the lands, we're running a bunch of deserts, so we can turn on our Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs. We have the classic desert, which fits really well because it's going to deal 1 damage to target attacking creature, which is going to become 3 damage. Desert of the Fervent and Desert of the Mindful are just there to draw some cards as cyclers, or we can just play them as tap lands, that's fine too, or to sacrifice to our other desert effects. We have Endless Sands, which is a little bit of protection for Ghyrson. We can kind of exile it in response to removal, and then return it to the battlefield later on if we feel we have to. Nikokoro is there as a nice little bit of card draw. Ramunap Ruins is going to help us close out games by dealing a little bit of extra damage to the face of our opponents. Scavenger Grounds is a nice little bit of graveyard hate on a desert. Shivan Gorge is really good here because it's going to be dealing 9 damage with each activation. Fantastic in this deck. Sunchcourt Desert is just a land that's going to come in and deal 3 damage to someone. Could be worse. And finally, War Room is going to draw some cards. Do note that I don't include the dual lands as usual in these decks, but in this particular deck you should play fewer duals than usual because you are playing Burning Earth and we want to mitigate the damage we take as much as possible. Okay, so there you have it. That's our Gerson, Starn, Kelermorph deck tech. What do you think about this deck? Are there any cards that I missed that you would like to include? Please let me know in the comment section below. I'm super excited to hear your ideas about this deck, and I read all of your comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and we're growing right now. And until next time, take care.